Do you know what happens when a family believes death is merely disobedience? In the forgotten hollows of Appalachia, where fog clings to the mountains like a burial shroud, there existed a bloodline that refused to let their dead rest. The Elbridge family didn't bury their children in consecrated ground. They kept them, preserved them, spoke to them in the darkness. And what began as devotion became something far more sinister, a ritual so grotesque that even the earth itself recoiled from their touch. This is the story of a house that breathed, soil that remembered, and children who never truly died. This is the macabre history of the Elbridge family. And I warn you, some truths are too horrifying to forget. The Elbridge homestead appears on land surveys from the early 1900s, a crooked square carved into the mountains between Jackson County, Kentucky, and the Virginia border. Today, if you follow those faded maps, you'll find only scattered brickwork and a collapsed foundation strangled by roots. The forest reclaimed it decades ago, as if nature itself wanted the place erased. Perhaps it should have stayed buried. The first signs that something was profoundly wrong don't come from police reports or newspaper clippings. They emerge from church logs, sealed birth certificates, and an 1869 census entry written in pencil so faint it's nearly invisible. The original head of household is listed as Jonah Elbridge, 38, farmer. His wife Mary, age 17, under children, just one word expected. By the 1880 census, everything had changed. Jonah was gone, Mary remained, now listed as head mistress of the home. But what chills the blood is how many people lived with her. 7 children, all bearing the surname Elbridge, no other adults present, and under relation to head of house for each child, a single word, unknown. The doctor who signed Jonah Elbridge's death certificate claimed natural causes, yet in his personal journal, recovered from a historical archive in 1972, he wrote something very different. There was nothing natural about what I saw in that house. He died with his eyes wide open, pupils constricted, his mouth packed with wax. Mary refused to bury him until the 3rd day. She said she was waiting for a sign. By 1895, railroad surveyors passing through the region made private notes that still survive in a museum basement. One surveyor wrote, "Avoid the Elbridge Ridge. They're singing from the trees some nights. In no language I know. They say it's just the girls practicing hymns." I don't think so. From this point forward, the Elbridge family appears and disappears across history like ghosts. They never stay in official records long, but they always show up when something goes wrong. Dead livestock, sealed wells, children gone visiting, who never return, yet no one in the region dares accuse them openly. Even in letters to state officials, the family is only ever referred to as them folks up the ridge. Then in 1901, something inexplicable is discovered. 3 men clearing brush stumble upon a white dress, still pristine, draped across a wooden frame near the ruins of the Elbridge home. The bodice is filled with hair. The sleeves are stitched shut. Inside the chest cavity is a single sentence embroidered in red thread. The bride returns when the son is ready. Her name was Martha Caldwell, and in 1904, she was one of the last official government visitors to enter the Elbridge property alive. Martha was a field nurse, assigned to travel across rural Kentucky, checking on births and home conditions under the new Public Welfare Mothers Act. Her journey into Elbridge Hollow was meant to be routine, just another inspection among dozens she performed that spring. She never spoke publicly about what she found, but her ledger, discovered in a government storage barn in 1967, tells a different story. Written in tight cursive under April 14, 1904, she describes her arrival. The air was close, the forest too quiet. The house was visible from the path, structure crooked, roof sagged, smelling of turpentine and elder root. A girl answered Martha's knock, no older than 12, barefoot, wearing a long dress, thin as paper. The child would not speak, her eyes glassy but not unkind, just watching. She turned and walked away without a word. Martha followed her inside. The interior was dark. All windows were covered with dried plants, bundles of something brittle tied with animal sinew. The air carried a strange scent, pine wax and something else, like iron. Multiple girls inside, Martha wrote. All look alike, no male voices heard. One older woman sat in a chair, face painted with white powder. She said nothing, just hummed. A pot boiled on the hearth, smelled wrong, something in it with teeth. Martha was offered tea. She declined. In one room, she was shown what she was told was a newborn, but the swaddled form was too still and the skin was gray. The girl holding it smiled, missing all her front teeth. Martha left quickly, but at the bottom of the ledger page, in darker ink and shaky handwriting, she added, "This is not a family, this is a vault. Something is kept here." Martha returned to her district station. 2 days later, she filed her report but refused any more ridge assignments. She never left her town again. Locals said she changed after that visit, grew pale, grew silent. She died in 1911, at just 36. On her death certificate, the doctor wrote, "Exhaustion of unknown origin." The Elbridge Ridge was never inspected again by public health officers. By 1919, whispers about the Elbridge Ridge had reached the county courthouse. The rumors weren't new, but now there was something more serious. Children had gone missing. Samuel Rayburn, 9, and Betty Jo Clemens, 7, cousins who'd gone foraging after church. Their trail led toward the Elbridge boundary, past a dry creek into a pine thicket, then vanished. No footprints, no torn cloth, no signs of struggle. Just one thing left behind: Betty Jo's bonnet wedged in a thorn bush. The inside was wet, but not with rain. Deputy Franklin Harker, a war veteran who'd returned from France with a limp and a temper, knew the Elbridge family kept to themselves, but he also remembered what his grandmother said about them. That ridge is where God left off, and something else took over. Harker filed a petition to forcibly inspect the homestead on grounds of suspected abduction and unlawful burial. The judge signed it, but no sheriff volunteered to go. Eventually, Harker and 2 civilian men rode up the ridge with dogs and shovels. The sealed report, partially burned but recovered from a courthouse fire in 1962, gives a grim account. The house was unoccupied at the time of entry, doors unlatched, food on the table still warm, numerous hand-carved dolls found in upstairs room, all with faces resembling real people. One bore a stitched name, Betty Jo. No adult bodies discovered, no sign of living residents. However, a cellar door was found beneath the hearth, concealed with boards. Upon entry, a significant odor of rotted metal. Cellar contained 11 wooden crates. Inside each, layered fabric, root bundles, and preserved human remains. Unclear if embalmed or natural desiccation. Specimens include infants, juveniles, and at least one adult female. One line had been scrawled in pencil across the bottom, not typed. The eyes are all open. The Elbridge name was struck from the census the following year. Officially, the family was declared migrated to unknown territories, but no migration documents exist. No tickets, no property sales, nothing. The home was boarded up, the path blocked with barbed wire, but locals said the ridge still hummed at night, a low sound like bees behind walls. And once a year, in the second week of October, someone would hang 3 black feathers from the church door in pine knot. No note, no one seen, just the feathers. When asked, the pastor said only this: "It's their way of reminding us the Elbridges were never gone. They just sank deeper." In 1937, nearly 2 decades after the failed investigation, a man stumbled out of the tree line behind the Pine Knot General Store, barefoot and bloodied, with barbed wire tangled around one arm. His name was Arlen Buckner, a moonshiner and drifter well known by lawmen, but on this morning he was unrecognizable, filthy, trembling, missing several fingernails. The only word he could say over and over: "She watches, even from the dirt." Doctors at the Whitley Infirmary found no burns, no signs of alcohol poisoning, just deep, deliberate cuts along his forearms and a fresh brand on his back, not fire-branded, but carved deeper, a symbol, 3 interlocked triangles. No one in town recognized it except Miss Edith Mays, who ran the post office. She hadn't spoken the Elbridge name in years, but when she saw the mark, her face turned pale. "That's theirs," she whispered. "The mark they gave to boys they kept." Arlen was committed to the state hospital after several episodes of screaming fits, always triggered by the smell of fresh bread or the sound of creaking wood. One night when the drugs wore off too soon, he wrote something on the wall in his own blood: "Do not bury the dead." A social worker traced where he might have been and found a rumor that he'd had an old family land deed he'd been trying to trade for whiskey. It was dated 1881, signed by Virgil Elbridge. That map was never found, but what was discovered months later were 2 dug-up graves near Black Hollow, both empty. Arlen Buckner died in 1943. His body was cremated, but before that, the mortician noticed something disturbing. The skin on his back, where the mark had been carved, had healed completely, but the symbol was still visible from beneath the skin, as if it was growing. In the spring of 1954, Pine Knot's only barber discovered a small bundle hidden inside his back room's chimney flue. Inside was an oilcloth satchel stained with soot, a rusted harmonica, and a folded yellowed letter signed only with the initial E. The handwriting was tight and frantic. "I write this with the last of my fingers," it read. "The rest she took. Said I had no need for them in the next life. Only my eyes, so I can keep watch." The postscript sent a chill down the barber's spine. "I buried Mama 4 times. She never stayed down." The barber turned it over to the sheriff, but by morning, the letter had vanished from the evidence file. The sheriff who handled it resigned 2 months later and left Kentucky altogether. That same year, schoolboys playing along the Cumberland River stumbled onto an old Elbridge family locket, half sunk in mud. Inside wasn't a photo but a lock of hair, black, preserved, fresh. The coroner who handled it wrote a personal note. If this hair is as old as the locket, something unnatural is preserving it, or someone. By 1957, sightings began again. Hikers reported seeing a woman in gray, tall, motionless, always barefoot, watching from the ridge, her face never clear, her eyes always fixed on something just beyond them. A local pastor, Reverend Albie Wren, began warning people in his sermons, not every grave stays buried. Some families find ways to bind the soul to soil, especially if it suits their hunger. He was fired that winter, declared mentally unfit to preach. A month later, he was found sitting in the middle of Route 92, naked, weeping, clutching a human jawbone. His own blood was smeared across his chest in the shape of 3 triangles. In 1963, Deputy Clara Wills was called to a report of screaming from under an abandoned church floor. The old oak chapel, a wooden structure shut down since 1918, after a boy was found hanging in the bell tower with no ladder in sight. Clara expected nothing, maybe trapped animals, but in the crawl space beneath the floorboards, she found something that would follow her to her dying day. The space had been dug out intentionally, with planks bracing the walls like a makeshift shelter. Inside was a girl, not quite a child, not quite grown, dirty, thin, with matted hair and a stitched-up mouth. She was alive, barely. When Clara tried to speak, the girl clawed at the dirt beside her, revealing a faded cloth doll and a worn Bible. The pages were inked in red, filled with names. Every single name ended in Elbridge. The girl's wrists were branded with the 3 interlocked triangles. But there was something else. A second mark burned into the wood above her bed. She breathed through the roots. The girl was taken to hospital, but never spoke, not even after her stitches were removed. She didn't cry, she didn't blink, and when lights were turned off at night, her heart monitor spiked violently. Doctors noted her pupils were unusually wide in darkness, almost feline, like they preferred it. Within days, men in plain black government sedans arrived. They produced federal documentation, transferred the girl quietly, and demanded the church be boarded shut. Clara protested and was removed from the force 3 weeks later. Years later, just before her death, Clara gave a recorded statement to her niece. Her final words, "That girl wasn't hiding, she was guarding something." In 1969, after decades of complaints, the county approved demolition of the old Elbridge well. The contractor sent was Walter Greaves, a Tennessee man with military engineering experience. Greaves was practical, experienced. He didn't spook easy until he touched the brickwork. The well was wrong. The bricks weren't just old, they were warm, and they hummed. Greaves placed his hand against the base and swore he could feel a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. He chipped at one of the bricks. It bled. Dark liquid seeped from the crack. Not water, not oil, something viscous and black-red. It smelled faintly of wet iron and herbs. Walter backed away and phoned in his report. The next morning, a work stoppage was issued, and his contract was canceled, with no explanation. In interviews decades later, Walter described recurring nightmares. "I'm always falling, not down a hole but sideways, like the earth's been turned. I'm sinking through layers of bone, teeth and roots. Something's always waiting at the bottom, smiling with someone else's face. By 1973, a second fence had been erected around the well. Not by the county, but by a private firm. No logo, no identification, just a worn warning nailed to a tree. They drank from her, now she draws back. The area around the well became dead earth. No birds, no insects, not even weeds. In 1975, a botanist took a soil sample and published a quiet report, noting the pH levels were incompatible with life. Soil appears decades dead, but recently disturbed, like something fed beneath it. His report was pulled from archives within 6 months. He died in a house fire the following year. The breakthrough came in 1977 from a break-in at the abandoned Elbridge homestead. College students entered one autumn night and found most things rotted. But in the attic, beneath loose floorboards, they discovered a ledger wrapped in deerskin. The pages were filled with cramped feminine handwriting, dated from 1894 to 1921. The front page was titled, "The Vessel's Book, Sacred Womb, Sacred Root." Each entry followed the same pattern. First came an account of ritual cleansing, often in cold water or soil. Then a name, usually male. Then a phrase, "He was taken." The line is pure, "I remained open." One chilling passage from 1903 read, "Elijah would not stop crying. His eyes turned gray too soon. We wrapped him in river vine and returned him to the well. I bled for 7 days after. Sister said that was holy." Another from 1918, "Thomas bore the mark too early. His teeth came in black. We sang until the roots stopped twitching." The final entry from 1921 was shorter, more desperate. "No more boys left. The seed withers. Sister says we wait for the next one born with the breath. We keep the house, and we listen through the trees." When the students reported the find, the ledger disappeared within a week. They were told it had been misfiled, but one student made a full photocopy and shared it with a fringe historical review. Her conclusion: the Elbridge women weren't victims, they weren't followers, they were the keepers, and they documented every burial, like a sacrament. In 1980, a folklorist named Dr. Lyle Ransom published a controversial thesis connecting the Elbridge family to a pre-colonial fertility practice centered around an entity known only as Mother Root. She wasn't a goddess, not in the classical sense. She was something older, hungrier. She demanded offerings from the soil, not crops or coins but bloodline. Ransom connected oral tales with the Elbridge lineage, tracing a specific phrase repeated in each. The one who bears the mark must return to feed the root. The mark he proposed referred to children born under strange signs: black teeth, gray eyes, bone deformities, or unexplainable early speech. These children weren't seen as cursed but as chosen, and ultimately sacrificed. After publishing his findings, Ransom's academic reputation was shredded. Within a year, he resigned from the university. He moved into a trailer near the Elbridge land. He was last seen in 1982. When officials searched for him, they found no body, only a circle of dried vines tied with baby teeth hanging from trees, and a single chilling note pinned to the trailer door: "She's still hungry." By 1983, medical records pulled from state archives revealed a pattern: a 5-generation sequence of miscarriages, infant deformities, and unnatural births, all logged by a rotating circle of 4 midwives, serving only the Elbridge women. None had licenses, none worked in hospitals. Everyone stopped practicing within months of delivering a child who was never seen again. The earliest midwife, Granny Elsie, assisted with births from 1898 to 1910. She wrote, "The girls bleed too early and the babies come too silent, but they always say the same thing. He was not for keeping." No male Elbridge child had survived past age 7 in over 100 years. They weren't buried in cemeteries. They weren't on any census after infancy. They vanished, and someone had to help make them vanish. That's where the midwives came in. They weren't just birth attendants. They were gatekeepers, delivering, diagnosing, and handing over any marked child to the women of the house. In the summer of 1984, a lightning storm sparked a fire in McCreary County. It swept through brush and grassland, but came to a violent halt at the old Elbridge orchard. Locals who arrived to douse the flames described a stench unlike anything natural. Not burning wood or leaves, but something sweeter, rotting, fleshy. What the fire revealed would haunt the community forever. Beneath the orchard soil, in neatly spaced rows, were human remains, tiny ones, dozens of them. Infant skulls, rib cages the size of birds, some with metal tags sewn into fabric that still clung to bone. Forensic analysis later estimated over 40 infant and toddler remains dating from roughly 1880 to 1975. Many bore fractures to the sternum and dislocated spines, indicating intentional trauma. One child's bones were fused to iron nails, driven through a wooden box that had been buried vertically. Botanists, examining the soil, found it had been repeatedly saturated with calcium and iron, consistent with blood and marrow breakdown. No plant can root in this spot again without extreme chemical remediation. The ground is ruined. A photo taken by a volunteer firefighter shows 3 burned trees still standing in the center of the orchard. At the base of one, carved into blackened bark, are faint scorched words, "Womb root return." The writing was on the inside of the tree's hollow, not the outside. Investigators couldn't explain how anyone could carve inward. Her name was Lenora Elbridge, and by 1985, she was the last living female bearing the Elbridge name. She was only 43, but looked closer to 70. She rarely left the house, never answered the phone. Social workers found her sitting in a rocking chair, whispering nursery rhymes to no one. Her neighbors recalled hearing the sound of a child crying from the house during storms. Always storms. One man knocked during heavy rain and heard a child's voice call, "Don't let her cut me again." But Lenora lived alone. Eventually, state authorities got a warrant. What they found inside a locked bedroom was unspeakable. A child approximately 8 years old, malnourished, mute, covered in ritual scars. The boy had a cleft palate that had never been treated, a partially fused arm, and burn marks consistent with branding tools. He was seated in a hand-carved wooden crib, far too small for his age, surrounded by clumps of dried herbs and small cloth dolls impaled with pins. On the wall was painted, "He lives because she sinned." Under questioning, Lenora admitted, "He was born under the wrong moon. I tried to fix him. Mama said we don't bury the broken ones anymore. We keep them near He listens better now. She believed the boy was the spirit rebirth of her brother, who had drowned in 1950. Psychiatrists deemed her mentally unfit for trial. The boy, given the name James, was placed into state care. He never spoke a word, not once. Years later, a nurse wrote anonymously, "He never cried, never laughed, but he'd stare at trees like they were whispering to him." Once during a full moon, he carved 3 names into his pillow with his fingernail. Lenora, Elbridge, return, Mary Beth's diary. In the autumn of 1986, after Lenora was committed, the Elbridge home was finally cleared. Authorities found something buried inside a false bottom chest, a diary bound in cowhide, pages brittle but intact. The first page bore a signature in ink dark as dried blood. Mary Beth Elbridge, October 3, 1871. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger of rituals, births, and punishments, a record of doctrine, passed from mother to daughter for over a century. Later entries grew darker. The 7th child was born in red moonlight. His eyes did not open, and he breathed backward. I took it as a sign. He is to be preserved until she returns. Preserved. That word came up again and again. It became clear the Elbridge women did not bury all their dead. Some were embalmed in primitive, unsanctified ways and hidden in cellars, under root cellars, even in trees. But the diary held one passage that investigators could barely believe. The first oath was taken beneath the black moon. I offered blood from my own womb, and the trees drank it well. From this line forward, each daughter must preserve one child, one root, one sorrow. In 1986, after discovering Mary Beth's diary, officials obtained clearance to dig beneath the main house. A hatch was discovered under the stone floor, sealed shut with rusted iron rods and waxy residue. When pried open, it exhaled air so cold and pungent, one officer vomited immediately. Inside was a chamber, stone walls, dirt floor, no light. At the far end was what looked like an altar, a preservation table, carved from dark hickory wood soaked in black stains. Lining the walls were wooden shelves bearing glass jars and cloth-wrapped bundles. Jars contained unknown liquids with suspended organic material, bits of hair, bone fragments, and in one, a fully formed infant hand still clenched. But what broke even the toughest officers was the last discovery. A preserved body, female, approximately 12 years old, hair braided, dress intact, skin pale and elastic as if only recently deceased, but tests showed she had died sometime around 1910. Pinned to her chest was a scrap of parchment with 2 words, "Bloodroot daughter." This chamber had not been used recently, but it had been maintained. Cobwebs were cleared, candles replaced. It was as if someone, even in recent years, had come here to remember or to continue. In every generation, a girl was chosen to continue the Elbridge ritual. When Nora Elbridge, born in 1931, came of age, she became the next in line. But Nora was different. Where her mother Ruth was devout and soft-spoken, Nora was sharp, questioning, drawn to the outside world. At home, she was being prepared for the preservation rite. It began on her 14th birthday. A lamb was slaughtered in the orchard. Its blood was collected in a wooden bowl. She was told to bathe in it. When she refused, her mother locked her in the root cellar for 3 days. "You must understand," Ruth told her through the door. Your womb is the garden, it must give and it must take. In her secret diary, discovered decades later, Nora described the rituals in chilling detail. They want me to carry one, not raise it, not love it, just birth it, then preserve it. They say the family dies if the bloodline is not sealed in sorrow. I will not be my mother's vessel. I will not be my sister's grave. At 16, Nora ran away. For years, the family told neighbors she'd gone west, but in 1974, she returned under a different name, as a social worker, with one goal: to stop the ritual before another girl was chosen. When reports came in from Clear Hollow County about a girl named Anna, kept home from school, seen bruised, never speaking, Nora knew the cycle had begun again. She visited the homestead, still under the care of Mary Beth, now an old woman. She wasn't recognized. Days later, Nora returned alone and broke in through the cellar door. Inside, she discovered fresh evidence: a girl's dress hanging near the altar, still damp, 2 new jars filled with clear fluid, a child's name, Anna, carved into a wooden beam newly scratched. Nora took photos, wrote everything down, and mailed a parcel to a colleague marked, "If anything happens to me, this is why." The next morning, her body was found on the roadside near the Elbridge orchard, ruled a hit and run. No witnesses, no suspects. Her notes never reached the colleague. The package had been intercepted, but one thing survived. Underneath the cellar, tucked behind loose stones, was a hidden iron box containing Nora's second diary, a last entry written hours before her death. They don't preserve bodies, they preserve obedience. But rot always rises, and when it does, I hope someone remembers my name, Nora Elbridge, the one who said no. The Elbridge story was supposed to end, but it never did. In 2021, a research assistant digitized a box of handwritten ledgers from the mid-20th century. Inside were birthing records, hundreds routine, except for 8 births logged to a single surname, Elbridge, in the 1970s and 1980s. No hospital, no attending physician, no death records, no school enrollments. These children were born on paper and then vanished. Every birth was marked with the same postscript: preserved in tradition, name withheld by maternal request. In 2023, a midwife posted anonymously about being contracted for a private home birth outside Beckley. The family insisted on no questions, no paperwork, no outside contacts. They paid in cash, but what she saw stayed with her. The baby wasn't for them, it was for something, somewhere else. They called it a vessel for the sealed one. She left midway through. A week later, she received a package containing her missing stethoscope and a lock of jet black infant hair tied in red ribbon. Whatever the Elbridge family began in the 1800s didn't die. It adapted. Modern names, modern methods, new wombs, but the same old tradition: preserve the line at any cost. By 2024, a drone hobbyist flew reconnaissance over the Elbridge ruins. The footage starts normal. Sweeping views of the hollow, the crumbling chimney, but the cellar doors, 2 warped wooden panels sunken into the ground, drew his focus. They had been cracked open, barely an inch. The drone's light pierced the cellar. At the base of stone stairs was a circular altar, cracked, covered in ash and bone fragments. Around it, a ring of handprints, small, almost childlike, charred into the floorboards. The drone hovered lower. There was movement. Something shifted beneath the stone slab. Not an animal, not wind, breath. A single puff of white air escaped like an exhale through damp rock. Then the drone's feed cut. When the operator drove closer to reconnect, every one of his electronics shut down. Within 50 feet of the clearing, dead. When he walked to the site on foot, he found the drone body shattered and carved into a nearby tree. The word return. The Elbridge family story was supposed to be over. But in the archives of Riverview State Psychiatric Hospital lay patient records marked child admission unaccompanied, no known family, wandering Route 83 near Elk Run. The boy's name was Jacob, estimated age 11, nonverbal when admitted, underweight, skin pale, fingernails caked with soil. What caught attention wasn't his silence, but his drawings. Every day, Jacob used charcoal to draw the same thing. A crumbling farmhouse surrounded by trees. Always the same crooked porch. Always a figure in the upstairs window. When they passed through Old Elbridge territory, the boy sat bolt upright and began screaming one name, Mara. Back at Riverview, Jacob finally spoke, barely above a whisper. She was the one in the dark. She walks backwards and lives behind the stone. She watches through the walls of wherever you sleep. When asked who Mara was, he said, "My family put her there." Jacob was labeled with early onset schizophrenia and transferred to a long-term children's unit. He died 2 years later, but in the final log entry, one note remained. Patient spoke clearly in final days, repeated the phrase, "It's in our bones now," said he saw Mara outside the window, watching, always watching, said the dirt wouldn't stop her this time. Sweet Hollow is still on the map, barely, a stretch of Appalachian woodland, no longer maintained by any town council. Local hikers avoid the area, not out of fear they claim, but because the land doesn't like to be walked on. They describe brittle earth that shifts beneath the foot, trees growing inward in perfect unnatural circles, and in the center, a hollowed-out section of forest that never grows back. They say birds don't land there, animals don't enter, and in the dead of winter, it remains warm. In 2022, amateur ghost hunters live-streamed a night in Sweet Hollow. They joked, laughed, taunted the spirits. By midnight, the camera was still recording, but no one was in the frame. All 6 were later found unconscious in different parts of the forest. No memory of what happened. All suffered severe burns on the soles of their feet. No fire had been lit. If you walk the trails just after dusk, some say you can still hear the sound of digging beneath the soil, not shovels, hands, and every now and then, on a windless night, a single voice carries across the trees. A little girl's voice. It says, "Tell them we're still here." The Elbridge name hasn't been uttered publicly in years, but old county records show a single active property deed still attached to that bloodline. Registered to a trust, anonymous, sealed, but the contact email has one strange thing in its address. The number 1891. The same year Catherine Elbridge was first recorded as missing. They say the land never forgot her, and neither did whatever lives beneath it, because a curse doesn't end when a bloodline dies. It ends when the last person refuses to feed it. In March of 2025, the genealogy website received an unusual DNA match request. The profile belonged to a woman named Sarah Blackwell, 32, adopted as an infant, searching for her biological roots. The system flagged a 98% probability match to historical DNA extracted from the Elbridge preservation chamber. In 1986, Sarah lived 3 states away. She had no knowledge of Kentucky, no memory of anything before age 2, but in her childhood medical records, buried deep in foster care archives, was a single notation from her first pediatric exam. Patient bears unusual birthmark on lower back, 3 interlocking triangular shapes, origin unknown. When contacted by researchers, Sarah declined all interviews, but her neighbor reported seeing her pack hurriedly one evening, face pale, hands shaking. She left behind only one thing: a handwritten note taped to her apartment door. It read, "I dreamed of a house with no windows. I dreamed of a woman with my face standing in the orchard. She said it was time to come home." Sarah's car was found abandoned on Route 83, just past the turnoff to Sweet Hollow. The driver's door was open, the engine still running. On the passenger seat lay a single object, a small wooden doll with Sarah's name carved into its chest. The Elbridges are still waiting, and the earth beneath Sweet Hollow still remembers how to call its daughters home.